All right, welcome back to another explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a forensic investigation of something you interact with every single day, the music you stream. We're zeroing in on the 2020 DDX credit crisis. This was a massive, pivotal moment where the underlying architecture of digital music literally fractured. We're going to decode exactly how the industry diagnosed this catastrophic failure, and, more importantly, how a really clever mix of manual authorship and a resurrected web protocol gave us the definitive path forward. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this crisis, just look at the numbers. Analysts estimated that a staggering 2.7 million albums were just floating out there in this state of totally uncredited chaos. I mean, we're talking millions of albums generating billions of microtransactions that were completely disconnected from the actual human beings who made the music. So we're not just talking about some lost data here. We're talking about the actual livelihoods of session musicians, engineers, and independent songwriters basically getting swallowed up by the digital void. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the metadata miasma. Second, the massive failure of Web 2 automation. Third, the forensic manual and SVG masks. Fourth, the X42 callback architecture. And finally, how we actually achieve bit-perfect creator credits. Part 1. The Metadata Miasma, the crime scene. So think back, if you can, to the era of physical media. Holding those big vinyl sleeves or flipping through those thick little CD booklets. You had all this ample, dedicated real estate that explicitly listed every single contributor. But as we rushed headfirst into digital streaming, we basically entered this barren ecosystem. Automated interfaces just stripped away all that rich, verified history, consumers got absolutely zero context, and creators got zero visibility. It was, quite frankly, a massive step backward. This brings us to the DDTech's 2020 Virtual Creator Credit Summit. Industry leaders gathered to address this total fracture, and their findings were incredibly urgent. They realized that contributor identification failures were literally blocking global payments. And because there were no interoperable standards, we ended up with what they called the metadata miasma. It's basically a thick, impenetrable fog of missing or just totally incorrect data that hit DIY artists the hardest. The consensus? We desperately needed to start capturing session data manually super early in the process, right inside the studio, instead of just crossing our fingers and hoping it gets figured out later. Moving on to part 2, feeling the Web 2 automation, the false lead. Now, what's really interesting about this is that before finding the actual solution, the industry chased a major false lead. They officially classified it as apostasy, or the upside-down tree metaphor. The hope here was that centralized Web 2 platforms could basically just scrape the internet and automatically piece together who played what. But, imagine a robot trying to guess who played a specific guitar riff just by reading a blog post. It doesn't work. It created an even foggier, highly unreliable ecosystem. You just cannot reverse engineer truth from a miasma. So the industry realized they had to completely pivot. They banished that upside-down tree idea entirely and shifted their focus to root anchoring and leaf node logistics. In plain English, this means moving away from centralized automation and pushing the power all the way to the edge, putting it right back into the hands of the creators in the studio. For data to have true sovereign stewardship, it has to be anchored in reality at the exact moment it's created. Which brings us to part 3, the forensic manual, SVG masks, the weapon. So, what was the actual technological weapon used to combat this miasma? Enter the SVG mask artifact. To put it simply, this is a strict, deterministic lock on the data. It's not generated by some random guessing algorithm. No, it is created manually using an agent cell known as polycritus. By applying these masks, architects were able to secure exact, bit-perfect metadata fidelity. There is no guessing involved here, just rigorous, absolute accuracy. This really perfectly illustrates the core philosophy taken straight from the Context 27 metaget shards. It says, manual authorship overrides automated miasma. The architectural documents prove time and again that the only path to bit-perfect data is the sweat of the brow. You literally cannot automate human intent. That manual effort is the absolute definitive requirement for truth. They call this dynamic the semiotic bridge. Think of it like this incredibly airtight partnership. You have the human pilot who acts as the author, applying their actual creative intent and mandates. And then the agentic cell, polycritus, comes in and executes all the computational sweat to lock that data in permanently.
This isn't just some fun theoretical concept. This is the literal, real-world mechanism that ensures a session bassist in a crowded studio actually gets their name permanently attached to a digital file and ultimately gets paid.
All right, let's move to part 4, the X402 callback architecture, the getaway vehicle. To really appreciate X402, we have to look back at the whole HTTP 402 fracture. So 402 was introduced way back in the late 90s as the payment-required status code. But it basically sat dormant for decades as an empty placeholder. Why? Well, because the early attempts to use it required this incredibly heavy, complex logic to bind legal documents to digital transfers. It was just way too bloated. But by applying localized webhooks in the early 2010s, engineers realized they could bypass all that bloat entirely. This paved the way for the mature X402 webhook revolution.
This new, elegant system is known as the chopsticks design. It's simple, it's fast, and it works perfectly. Here's how. Step 1. The server triggers a 402, which basically demands proof of capability. Step 2, an autonomous agent natively processes this webhook payload. And finally, step 3, the server receives a client callback receipt. That receipt acts as a total immutable lock-in. It is a completely brilliant event-driven architecture that enforces absolute exactness.
Which brings us to the final piece, part 5, bit-perfect creator credits, the resolution.
When you look at these two paradigms side by side, the legacy Web 2 miasma versus our new X402 and masks architecture, the upgrade is literally night and day. We move away from lazy automated scraping right into manual sweat-of-the-brow authorship. We abandon all that theoretical, heavy Ricardian complexity for the super streamlined chopsticks webhook design. We're trading a foggy, unreliable ecosystem for deterministic, bit-perfect truth. And instead of ambiguous guessing, we finally have unshakable, callback-anchored verification. So here is your definitive formula and the ultimate resolution to that DDINX 2020 crisis. Masks provide the anchored, deterministic authorship. Callbacks provide the immutable transport. And combined, they yield bit-perfect creator credits. It's a real game changer. This is no longer just some abstract proposal. It is the mature, definitive architectural path to capturing absolute accuracy and overriding the automated Web 2 miasma for good.
We've seen exactly how deterministic agents and webhook architectures completely rescued the music industry's supply chain from absolute chaos. But I really want to leave you with this final thought. If the combination of manual mask realization and X402 callbacks can achieve true, bit-perfect truth for music credits, what other broken, foggy corners of our digital economy can this exact same architecture fix? What else is trapped in the miasma right now, just waiting to be anchored? Think about that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.